You're heading south of the Mason-Dixon. This is the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. Here is your host, Brian McClanahan.
Welcome back to the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. This is Brian McClanahan, your host, and this is episode 42, covering the week of September 12th through September 16th, 2016. Glad to have you back on the program. Just before we get started, I want to remind everyone to consider donating to the Abbeville Institute for about the same price as a monthly purchase of an all-star special at Waffle House. You can support the Institute and help us keep this podcast going, help keep the website up, help keep our programs going. It's greatly appreciated. It is tax deductible, to the full extent of the law. So please consider that. Also like us on all of our social media pages, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and help us spread the word. We do get a lot of traction through our social media networks, particularly Facebook. So if you have a Facebook account and you're hearing this podcast and you haven't liked us yet, go on over to Facebook and look us up, Abbeville Institute. And we have joined the other a little over 5,000 people that have liked us there and share our material. We'd like to see that be 50,000 or 100,000. I mean, it should be. Anyone who's interested in exploring what's true and valuable in the Southern tradition should like us there and share our message. Okay, so let's get started with the material for the week. This is going to be a little shorter podcast because there's a couple of pieces I'm not going to get into too much detail with. Actually, 3 pieces of the week. But I am going to talk about why they're there. And there is a reason. It'll actually piggyback on what I talked about last week. And so we actually have 3 pieces this week that are dedicated more to Southern culture than anything else. They're not political. But the idea is to help people understand what they are supporting. When you say, well, I support the South. Well, what does that mean? And you hear people talk about this all the time. Well, I support Southern history. Well, to a lot of people in the United States, that means about 4 years of Southern history. That's the war. But Southern history is 400 years. And Southern culture is the reason why those people in 1861 to 1865 believed that they were fighting for independence. Now, I know there are people that would disagree and say, no, that's not what they were fighting for. They were fighting for slavery. Well, there's enough evidence that's been produced by mainstream historians to conclusively smash that argument. They had a culture that was unique and different. For most Southerners, they were fighting for independence, fighting for their hearth and home. And they were looking to preserve something that they thought was under assault from an alien people. And that goes all the way back to the founding of the North American colonies in 1607. The colonists who founded Jamestown in 1607 and then who later established themselves in Virginia were much different than those who had established Plymouth or Massachusetts Bay in 1620 and 1624. The Pilgrims and the Puritans. And you see this moving forward. You see that the culture of the North was heavily dominated by Puritan culture and Quaker culture, and the culture of the South was heavily dominated by Celtic culture and Cavalier culture. Even on the frontier regions of Pennsylvania, you had Celts there, and they were different from the Eastern establishment in Philadelphia. There was a cultural divide there, and a lot of those people from Pennsylvania ended up moving out west, and some of them moved further south. So it wasn't just confined to a geographic region. You did find, even in New York City, for example, during the war, New Yorkers were fairly sympathetic with the South. There was actually a movement to have New York City secede from New York State because the people of New York City felt a common cause with those in the South. A lot of it was due to money. But you also had pockets of Southern support in New Jersey. You had pockets of Southern support all over New England. So it would be too simplistic to say it was just this and this. But what you do find is that those who tended to culturally align themselves with this old-style American Celtic Cavalier culture were generally found in the South. And a different type of person was found in the North. And so one of the things that we try to do at the Institute is promote Southern culture. What makes Southerners unique? Why are they different? Particularly in the 21st century. And actually one of the pieces we're talking about this week is, rethinking the war for the 21st century. So in the 21st century, we don't live in the 1860s anymore. We don't live in the 1850s or 40s. But what is it that makes Southerners unique? And by the way, there's also been a comment made on social media that there are no quote-unquote actual Southern intellectuals in the Abbeville Institute, and I find that just laughable. But this particular person was saying that we don't compare to people like Calhoun and Dabney and Fitzhugh. Well, I know what the individual's getting at. But the thing is that you have to understand is, again, Southern intellectual history is deeper than just the 1830s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. I would find St. George Tucker as much of a Southern intellectual as John C. Calhoun. I mean, we love Calhoun. We've had many pieces on Calhoun and Dabney. They were perceptive about what would happen if this progressive idea that was saturating the North, which covered all kinds of social issues, became the dominant idea in America. But you also have, we believe Thomas Jefferson was a great Southern intellectual, and as I said, St. George Tucker and John Taylor of Caroline and Nathaniel Macon and on down the line. So we have a much more comprehensive view of what it means to be a Southerner. And I think that's the important thing to grasp. Again, Southern history is 400 years. And if we're seeking to preserve Southern culture, what is it we're preserving? Obviously, language is important. The Southern accent is important. And one really interesting thing about that, there was actually, I was reading something about colonial America the other day, and one of the things that was said was that the Southerners in Virginia, white and black both, spoke a perfect old-style English. As one traveler came over to the United States, spoke a perfect old-style English that was very much in line with what people would find in London at the time. And they were shocked by this. But again, this is the people of the South holding on to this English tradition longer than anyone else. This Cavalier tradition. They were speaking the language of Shakespeare, as this particular traveler said. And so language is important. Our literature, our arts, the arts of the South, literature, music, these things are important. There's an identity there. And I think young people, this is one thing, and I'm going to talk about that in the last piece very quickly. Young people are looking for this. They just have to be told it's okay. Because so often, they're not. I mean, one thing you do look at popular culture, and you look at popular movies and how Southerners are often portrayed, usually negatively, or they're always the comic relief, and some of that's good. I mean, look, Southerners are funny. My children were watching a cartoon movie the other day entitled Cars 2, and there's a character in these Cars movies made by Disney named Mater, and it's Larry the Cable Guy that does the voice for Mater, and he's often the comic relief. He does say very funny things. He's of course, got a Southern accent. He's an old rusty tow truck. He's got buck teeth. So there's a caricature there. You couldn't get away with that in any other ethnic group in the United States, but you can with Southerners. But the interesting thing about this film is, of course, he's a character. Everyone's saying, gosh, you're so stupid, Mater. You always mess up. But at the end of the day, Mater's the hero because he's faithful, because he admires his friends, and he works for them. And he's actually very intelligent. So behind all this, the moral of the story is friendship and loyalty and courage and faith to your town. At the end of the movie, he's offered to go off and be this super spy, and Mater says, no, I like it right here. These are my people right here in this little town of Radiator Springs. Now, it's out west, but this little town of Radiator Springs is my town. These are my people. And I think at the end of the day, that's what Southerners are known for. That's a quality that they should trumpet all over the United States. We like our people right here. These are our people. And some of them may be bad, and some of them may be, people we don't like. And some of the things these people advocate we don't like. But these are still my people. And I'm going to be loyal to my people. And if you look at 1861 to 65, that's exactly what was happening. I'm going to be loyal to my people. That's what Lee said. I can't fight against Virginians. I may not have been an ardent secessionist, and he wasn't. But I can't fight against my people. So I'm going to fight with them. And so that's something we have to think about. And what is it that could hold all these people together? So the first piece of the week is actually a political piece written by Kirkpatrick Sale entitled The Great Divide and Secession. He talks about how Texas, if Hillary Clinton wins, a large percentage of the Texas population says they want out of the Union. So this is, again, we're looking at political reaction to a major election. But what is it about Texas that can make that possible? And Sale points it out. They already have their own culture. They have a large economy. Now he says, some of the things there, they'd have to restructure some of the economy. But this is better than war. I mean, he says, if you're sensible about it, then it's just a divorce. And that's it. And people could still get along. It'd be a great trading partner. Texas, though, has an identity. It has a people. The Texas people, you know it. And sometimes these people are made fun of by the mainstream society because they seem to not fit. We're going to laugh at those people in Texas. But they have an identity, and they have a strong culture. And he says a lot of people that don't like the United States might even move into Texas. You might see a mass exodus of people into Texas if Texas was to actually leave the Union and pull it off. I think if something ever happened like that, if one state were ever to leave, you would see other states try to pull it off too. They would just get out. But the fact is, Sale's right. Texas could survive independently without a problem. It's a large state, but you don't even have to have a large state to have that happen. We see small states all over the world. So, when you look at the United States and you start looking, well, what states could actually think about this? One of the states that I think was interesting that's often overlooked was this independence movement in Vermont. I mean, Vermont has its own culture, has its own music, its own type of language, its own type of people. I mean, look, Bernie Sanders. He's a different kind of person. And there was a very strong secession movement in Vermont until Thomas Naylor died. It's kind of petered out, but I mean, there's still people there that talk about it, the Second Vermont Republic. These are radical left-wingers, but they have their own culture. And they were promoting that. Let's listen to Fish. Let's do our own little Vermont thing. Let's have our own Vermont music. And again, they're identifying something that's very important. And so I'm going to get into that here in a couple of pieces. But they're identifying something that's important, and that's maintaining a culture, a language, a literature, a music, something that makes them different and unique, and something worth preserving. And so one of the things that is worth preserving in the South is its literature. There are great Southern literary figures that are often overlooked because they're not considered to be excellent by the mainstream literature profession, I should say, or the intellectual literature profession. And that's because they don't know them. Or we have to say, well, I mean, Southerners are okay, but these Northerners are so much better. I mean, these are silly things. But we did produce a poem by Robert M. Peters. He was just an amateur poet, but he sent this poem to us, and it was good. And one of our great literary scholars, David Middleton from Louisiana, who've produced poems on this website before and spoken at conferences on Southern literature, he said, no, this is a good poem. Put it up there. So we did. And I'm not going to read it, but it's a poem about life and enjoyment and peace and harmony, and harmony with the world around you. And I think that's something Southerners have long been proud of. When you look at the first pieces of literature that started coming out of the colonial what became the United States, colonial America in North America, you find that Southerners were optimistic. And there was a harmony with the spirit of nature. I mean, they really looked at the world differently than Northerners did. Northerners had a foreboding about this environment. It was cold. It was dark. It was a place to be tolerated, not enjoyed. And Southerners had an entirely different look at things. Virginians did. This is a place that was bountiful. It was utopia in many ways, and they wanted to not just survive it, but thrive in it. And that's something that Southerners have always had. It's a quality with the land. It's not just survival, it's a love. It's like your feet have roots, and they're planted in the dirt. And you do find this in the North, too. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are Northerners that think this way. But when you look at the South, there's a much stronger pull to the people and the environment and the land than there is really in anywhere else in the United States. There's love of your state everywhere you go. Love of your people everywhere you go. But Southerners as a whole are more apt to sing about it and talk about it than any other people. And I'm going to skip over the Wednesday piece and get to the last two because this hits at that. So, A Faithful Southern Fisherman was a little piece by Ted Roberts. It was a piece of fiction, sort of fiction, nonfiction, but he's talking about fishing and how when he was exiled in New England, he used to talk about the fishing in the South. You see, even when a Southerner's in another place, they're still Southern. There's an old, saying, you can take a boy out of Dixieland, but you can't take Dixie from the boy. Leonard Skinner had that in a song. But again, music. But this is, common thing. So he was always talking about how great it was to be fishing and the stories that he told. And the part of the fun of fishing was telling stories to your children, your family, when you were there. And being that Southern storyteller was important because it forged continuity. And he talks about that in the piece. How his son listened to these stories. And now his son is telling the same stories right in front of his father. And, of course, his father is going to make corrections when he can. But it's that continuity between generations that's passed down through things like fishing. And that's the same thing with the, not quite a poem. It's a continuity there. It's generational. That's important. Because that keeps culture alive. That keeps a people alive. And it's understanding your people. There's a book by Owen Winster titled Lady Baltimore. And there's this wonderful, and early in the book, wonderful quote. And it's something to the effect that, people in the North had money but no grandfathers. Or people that had money and no grandfathers didn't understand genealogy, but people that had grandfathers and no money understood it very well. And that's essential. Southerners have grandfathers but no money, many of them. And that's okay, because that continuity survives, and that keeps people together. And that keeps a culture alive. It's not run over then by consumerism. Chasing the dollar, getting the next dollar, whatever it is. It's not run over. And I think that's, one of the beautiful things about Southern culture. Are there people in the South driven by money? Well, absolutely. Are there consumerists in the South? Sure. Go out and just drive around. You got McDonald's and Burger King on every corner. I mean, Southerners love this stuff too. But at the end of the day, I think still they recognize this continuity between generations differently than maybe any other people in America. The grandfathers are important. I think some of this is slipping. This is why, we're here. But then there's there's the music element, and I wrote a little piece for Friday entitled "Deep Down in the South." It's about a little band entitled named Whiskey Myers from Texas, and they had a new album come out entitled "Mud." Well, if you like kind of a southern rock, that's a little harder edge, you'd like this band. And the interesting thing about it is that, first of all, 1970s was the heyday of southern music, whether it's outlaw country or southern rock. And the South seemed to be the place that people were looking to. Jimmy Carter elected president. It was chic to say y'all in Boston. But it was more a reflection of a people at that time. They were just producing stuff that they thought was good music. But people liked it, and they attached to it. And they sang a lot about place. Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, Carolinas, Florida, Texas. They sang about places. Virginia. More than any other people, they sang about these places. Missouri. And some of that faded in the background. By the time you got to the 80s, and again, more of a plastic society, more of a consumer-driven society, then in the 90s, of course, Southerners were just the butt of every joke. But what's interesting about that is some of these younger guys, now these guys are young, they're in their 20s. They're not older guys, they're young guys. But one of the songs he talks about, the song title is Hank, and how his first record was a Hank Williams Jr. record, and that's why he wanted to play southern rock / country music. So again, it's the continuity. He's singing the songs of the 70s to create this modern love of the South. And they had a wonderful song out several years ago entitled Ballad of a Southern Man. It's really great. We've had it on this website before. It's in this piece too. But this particular album talks about things, and there's some great quotes in the album, great lines in the song. Some of it's a little bit cliche because you get that. But at the same time, it still is a love of the South. And they actually have a song entitled Deep Down in the South. And how they love that. So it's about a people. It's about Southern themes and things like poverty and the land and hard work and love and pride and the martial spirit. It's there. Defiance, nostalgia, family, history. It's all there. So again, it's holding on to a culture that is very important when you're exploring what's true and valuable in the Southern tradition. Holding on to that culture. Holding on to the literature and the music. And when you look at what Clyde Wilson said about rethinking the war for the 21st century, this is what he's talking about. Now, he is getting to the war. He is talking about the war and, of course, Confederate history and the mischaracterization of Confederate soldiers and how these people are worthy of defense. And how the real myth in American history is Lincoln, but how we need to remember who we are. And he says this, talking about the time before the 1950s, or in the 1950s even. He says, those days are gone forever, though many of our SCV compatriots seem to think that it's still the 1950s and have not realized that they live in a world of political correctness, which is a polite form or name for cultural Marxism. Remember, this is not an argument over historical interpretation. This is about who we are. He says it was necessary for them to do this to support their political agenda because the weight of facts is on our side. And so some of this is political. He says, look, the Southern understanding of the Constitution was never refuted, and it can't be. It was simply crushed, preserving the Union. You cannot preserve the Union or government of, by, and for the people by a massive military invasion that destroys the constitutional, democratically elected governments of nearly half the states and converts them into conquered provinces with puppet governments and their citizens deprived of rights. So what he's getting to is the fact that these men in 1860-61 were just as worthy of the emulation and the accolades that the men of 1776 were. They're fighting the same cause for political independence and to live their own way, to preserve their own culture. And what is wrong with that? Now, we can say, all right, even if you're not in support of Southern culture, I mean, wouldn't you want to say then, well, we don't like those people, so they should just leave? We can have our own union. The question was asked to me the other day, well, you know, if the South was successful, the United States would have disappeared. No, it wouldn't. In fact, James A. Byard pointed this out in the Senate. He said, the United States still exists. We still have a government. We're here, aren't we? We still have all of our financial houses. We still have our military. We still have trading partners. We have all of that stuff. The Union still survives. We're not fighting for the Union now. We're fighting to conquer another people. Byard was from Delaware, and he was not a slave owner. He was simply looking at this with a clear, reasoned mind. But this is important because rethinking the war is important in many ways is the Holy Grail, thinking about this idea of independence and what it was and what it meant. By crushing independence, in essence, the Lincoln administration crushed any attempt or any chance people had in the United States of real opposition to the central government. Not even if you just take away the idea of the war and just being able to politically oppose what Washington, D.C. is doing becomes much more difficult. And if you're trying to hang on to a culture and an identity of a people, sometimes you have to push back because it's under assault. And in so many ways, it doesn't make sense because we have such razor-thin majorities now. And if you put this question to the left and you say, well, look, what happens if you're not in power? Right now, you've got your guy. For the last 8 years, you've had your guy in power, and you've been able to push an agenda. What happens if your guy's not in power anymore? Are you then afraid of power? Because can't that be used against you? And the same thing has to be asked of those on the right. I mean, they were pushing for an expanded executive branch during the Bush administration, but now that Obama's in office and he's using that same expanded executive branch against them, isn't that dangerous? And you just carry that out to the general government. Isn't it dangerous for a 50 plus 1% of the people to dominate the other? Because your culture is under assault then, whatever that culture may be. We know there's an identity in different parts of the country. That culture is under assault by an alien people. And so wouldn't it be better just to not have that assault anymore? I mean, this is just a logical thing. Wouldn't it be better for everyone involved? Now, Clyde concludes this piece by saying, here's our great advantage. Our Confederate ancestors are truly admirable and decent people. All over the world know it. We need to defend them. And that's what we're doing here. We're not just defending that 4-year period, though. We're defending not just Confederate ancestors, but Southern ancestors. We're defending the ideas of self-determination, which was the American position. Again, so it's not just not just the South we're defending. We're defending America. The South is America. We're defending that. We're defending a culture. But more than that, we're exploring what's valuable in that culture. There are things in every culture, every tradition that aren't necessarily worth defending and carrying forward. And we're not carrying everything in Southern tradition forward. There are things that are gone and buried, and thankfully so. But there's a lot of this that's still valuable for America today. Something simple as manners. Manners. If more people had manners, perhaps the world would be a better place to live. You go around everywhere today, even in the South, parts of the South, nobody has any manners anymore. So isn't it nice to actually talk about Southern manners? Or how about living life a little slower? and not be so fast-paced. Isn't that nice? Having a relationship with the environment that's not dominated by going to the store to buy something, buy your new shoes or clothes. Something else. Something more wholesome. Isn't that better? I mean, we used to like Mayberry because it was a small town, small southern town, and the people there were decent people. Isn't that a better place to live? Shouldn't we be looking at that? But we don't. We make fun of these things because we think that can't exist. Well, sure it can. It can. Mayberry can exist. You just have to have good, decent people. And a lot of that starts at home. And a lot of that starts with your culture. If your culture is a good, decent culture, then people are going to be good, decent people. Until next time, good day.